Rose, how you doing today? What are you loving, not loving?
I can tell you what I'm not loving, and it's somewhat self-inflicted. As I was off traveling, I left my laptop charger at my mom and dad's house, so I had to do a whole new podcast setup, and it's creating some technical challenges from an audio standpoint because my laptop would have died in the middle of the podcast. And then the other thing is we just had some technical difficulties on a recording, and I am very fearful that we're going to have to re-record an episode, and that's breaking my heart because it was really good. So that's what I'm not loving. To be perfectly honest, I'm struggling coming up with a loving right now because
Exactly. Because let's just face it, it's been a crap morning for Rose, folks.
I know what I'm loving. I'm loving that my boy is sitting next to me and was very good during the recording that we may have to scrap.
That's true. And let's that we may have to trash, but let's remind folks who your boy is, to be clear.
Oh, my boy is not my husband, though I do love him. But he doesn't lay on the floor next to me because that'd be weird. My boy is my little French bulldog, Gus, who is usually very vocal while I'm recording anything. But he's been very well behaved today. So I am loving that. There's always joy and a silver lining somewhere.
Yes, there is. And that sounds so cheesy, but it's the absolute truth. And okay, here, I'll tell you a piece of something I'm loving was this insight someone gave to me the other day, which is whether it's a particular day or even a phase, meaning a couple weeks or a month, that are really intense for whatever reason.
Non-optimal.
This person said that she really worked hard when she got up in the morning to say, I'm going to find some joy in this day somehow. And that is just, could be the tiniest thing. But she was just waking up to day after day of not exciting things she had to deal with. But she just really worked to reframe her brain and be like, well, I'm just going to stay present and try to find the joy where I can. And I just thought I channel that.
In the scheme of things, it's not an awful day. Everybody's health is fine. Nobody's sick. The sun is shining. I just had a fabulous vacation. So in the scheme of things, it's not a big deal. It just is making me sweat.
Yes. I'm telling you, anyone who's listened to this podcast regularly, it's like another episode in the adventure of doing a podcast and what a grind it can be. And I also would have to say that I'm guessing every single person who's listening or has listened to this can relate to leaving a charger of some sort. I've left more phone chargers in hotel rooms than I can count. And I have certainly lost my power supply to my laptop. It's such a grind.
How about you? What are you not loving? You didn't give us a not love. Quickly.
I'm just going to channel love today. That's what I'm doing. I'm channeling love because you've had a day. And so now I'm going to transition to something I really love, which is our next guest, Devin Hughes. Devin is now an independent practitioner and consultant who calls himself the Chief Inspiration Officer. And he does work with all kinds of teams. He's a speaker about working together productively. He's also an expert in a variety of DEI topics. And he himself has had a very interesting career journey. He started off in the corporate world, like many of us, and we'll learn a little bit about his sort of career pivot. Also, a fun little trivia fact about Devin is he played basketball in college at Colgate, which is where I met him, and we were in the same freshman dorm. So it's been really fun to see Devin's journey and keep up with it. He's also written a number of books. One I really recommend is his memoir called Contrast. And with that, let's welcome Devin.
Devin, it's so great to have you. And let's just start with learning a little bit more about your professional journey, where it began, some of the stops along the journey, and how and what led you to your current role as, and I love this, Chief Inspiration Officer.
Yes. So thank you for having me. How did I get here? Well, I'll step back. When I graduated from Colgate University in 1991, I was a sociology major. I was thinking I was going to be Indiana Jones. I couldn't find the Temple of Doom. So I decided to go the road less traveled. I was a first generation college student. So I didn't have necessarily the best guidance. I didn't go to the career center. I didn't do any internships. I just thought you just kind of went out in the world and you just, I don't know, you just find jobs. And then I realized really early on, that's not kind of how it works. So I must have had probably 30 jobs. I worked at Ava's Rent-A-Car. I was a temp. I worked for Michelin Tire.
Oh, that's great. School of experience and hard knocks.
Yes. And so I was 23, like managing like 50, 60-year-old guys who were just like industrial and rough and tough. But it was really good training ground for me later in life. The point of that story is, though, I learned early on what I didn't want to do and what I did enjoy doing, and was fortunate enough to navigate into two industries towards the end of my career, high tech and the life sciences. And my more formative years in terms of professional development were in those two industries on the commercial side, managing teams and peoples and departments and hiring and all that kind of stuff.
So tell me one thing. Tell me the last mile in the marathon that got you to the inspiration officer part.
Yeah, so my dad was in the Air Force. So I grew up in a military family. I went to military high school. I played basketball in high school. I played at Colgate. So I always found that I performed better when I felt better. That the best version of me was when I was a better place emotionally, when I was in a better headspace. And so going through all those different jobs, I had some great jobs and not so good jobs and good bosses and not so good. And I was like, the common denominator was if the culture and climate was right, if it felt good, the vibe was right, I did better work. And so did everybody else. And we had lower drama and stress. I'm like, one day I'm going to create an opportunity to replicate that, to help other people create that. And so literally my last job, I think I was at Michelin in some kind of industrial type training managing role. Someone just proclaimed me the chief inspiration officer, kind of like sarcastic, you know,
Yeah.
and kind of flip it, throw it around. And I'm like, yes, I am.
That's me, man. That's me. That's awesome.
And so I just stepped into it. And I was like, you know what? That's what I want to be. There's the CEO, the CIO, the CTO. I'm going to be the chief inspiration officer. I'm going to help other people create the vibe that I so crave.
I absolutely love that. It fits well with a lot of our former topics and a lot of the interviews that we've done that, you know, where we poke a little bit about how important is the environment in addition to the results, right? Because Dana often asks the question, I hear people push back on the leadership, the management, the people, the culture, the environment, and say, hey, our indicators are really strong even without focusing on that. But I think a couple things always come to the forefront, which is what you just said. I perform better when I feel better. I love that. And then can you sustain the results if you don't sustain the culture and the people? So that was great. Thank you.
I love your journey. And I think it's also indicative of a lot of us, I don't know if it was just us, meaning our generation, but I didn't exactly graduate college with a big plan either. I just was like, well, I'll apply for some jobs and see what I get. And you obviously dipped your toe into a variety of different industries, a variety of different roles. And just at a practical, tactical level, what did you learn along the way about what it takes to be successful as a manager and leader of people?
Yeah. So a couple of things I learned. It always starts with the numbers, but ends with the people. So whatever outcome we may drive, we trying to drive sales, retention, engagement, all the other stuff, but always with the people. And so I learned early on that you could have the best software, the best tools, the best resources. You could even have the best perks and parties and food trucks and t-shirts and ball games. If you didn't get the people side right, all the other stuff didn't matter. So I'll give you an example. So I got really into, and I don't know how I kind of fell into this. It was kind of serendipitous. I kind of fell into the science of like, how do you actually transform human behavior?
Yes.
How do you actually build authentic, real connections with people? Because you don't really think about it when you're in college. It's just your proximity. You just vibe with people, you vibe and you show up. But it works different because we're adults. We go home, we have lives. So it was like, how do we actually do that? And so the foundation of all that, I realized, is, over certain things, with trust. I can't tell you to trust me, Dana. I have to, it's kind of give and take. And you have to earn it. So For example, I'll give you an example. I found that when I was building relationships, there was two types of trust. There was the practical trust, which was like the type of trust you earn by being steadfast, by meeting your commitments, by showing up on time. I can rely on your competence and dependability. Well, so I was like, okay, we kind of get that. The nuance of that to me was the emotional trust. It's when people trust that you're on their side, that you'll treat them kindly and respectfully and you won't judge them. And then when things get heavy and hard, so that sandbox of thoughts and feelings, the messy side, where I really spent a lot of time trying to be a practitioner across generational and races and genders and all that, and really trying to understand the science of that, how you actually build emotional trust with people that's authentic and real.
I actually have a follow-up question, considering the changes that we're seeing in society right now, with a lot of what I'd call transactional or maybe even AI type relationships where people are forming relationships through a screen. We'll talk a little bit about the workplace here in a bit, so I don't want to go there, but let's just talk about our youth and how many of their relationships are transactional through an application, whether it be Snapchat or text. What are you seeing and how that's potentially impacting their effectiveness at work when they really haven't built those truly emotional relationships because they're working through screens?
Yeah, so this is fascinating. And again, this is where it gets interesting, right? Because we're quick to judge. Like, I hate when I'm in conversations and like the millennials.
Oh, yeah, no. Right.
As if you had it all figured out. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Oh, no.
Because we've got it all figured out.
I just read an article about that, about like, oh my God, the demise of the youth. And I wouldn't call it a demise because, you know, you could reflect back on the kids of the 60s and probably hit the same type of at least societal issues. But the thing that is new is the technology. So are you seeing that technology impact ability to connect?
Yes, I am. Because right now you can graduate from college and never leave your bedroom. I go to areas and they're tearing down basketball courts. They're tearing down conduits to play. I was just looking at the data the other day because I was doing a talk, but this is interesting based on this conversation. You know, church attendance is down almost 45% in the US. Volunteering.
Yeah.
Volunteering in the last 10 years, 15 years. So church attendance is down, volunteering is down, family dinners are down. And there was one more data point, I think about it. And I was like, you know what? It's not about religion. It's not, there are conduits humans would gather.
Yes. Community.
We've lost a sense of community. And whatever religion, or maybe you didn't, but there was another data point was interesting data was even overnight camp for kids is demonstrably down.
Oh, wow. Because kids are so scheduled these days and they, they'll have sports all through the summer and all of that. Yeah.
But at least the sports created opportunity for gathering. Back to the point. There's an option for gathering because that's my concern, Devin, and what I'd like to understand how that may then pivot into workplace effectiveness.
So I do think it does because, again, to your point, I find that more relationships right now are transactional. It's what do you need? How can I help? Because no one, again, I'm generalizing, no one is usually hanging around on a Zoom call to go, hey, Rose, I'd like to get to know you a little bit. Would you hang on for 10 minutes? I got nothing else to do on my Outlook calendar. We miss the serendipitous proverbial water cooler conversation. We don't have the interchange in and out of the office or out of meetings.
There's this metaphor I've been using lately that I got from someone else about remote work is 2D, whereas work together in person is 3D. Part of that stems from, and I'll never forget this guy saying this to me. It was a client that I worked with, and I had to work with him for a number of months to get ready for an event. And he and I talked a lot. It was via Zoom, but at least it was in person and we could see each other. And he was just a nice guy, easy to talk to, easy to get work done. And then his emails, though, were quite different. The tone was, there were no frills. No, hey, how was your weekend? Hope it was fun, right? That is stuff he would say if we were talking in person. It was not stuff he was going to say if we were texting or emailing. And he even at one point was mentioning I don't like emails that are full of chit chat. I mean, that's just stupid. And then it was so funny because I happened to be sitting with a coworker who was a lot younger, recent to the workforce. Maybe she was 25 and new to the organization. And I'm so glad she had the guts to say this. She said, I have to tell you, my first way of quote unquote knowing you was via email. And I honestly thought you were a scary person. And then the minute I hung out with you in person, I realized you weren't that way at all. And I had seen it too. Like the way he was in person was a much fuller person, much easier to trust and relate to than he was in email. So I share that just with your points, both of yours, that you're just not getting the full experience when things are mediated during apps. And by the way, that casual exchange about I'm not chatty and them, that was live. That was in person. And I am sure that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
That's a good story.
Yeah, it was very interesting. All right. Another thing that I'm certainly passionate about, and Rose and I talk about it a lot, is that people break down management and leadership into two different things. And you can say that they are, that leadership is more about understanding the big picture and inspiring and being aware of trends in the external environment. And management is more about enabling the work day to day. But I see leadership as celebrated as the sexy thing. You don't want to be a manager. You want to be a leader. And I think that does a disservice to organizations in a variety of ways. One, I don't know anyone, no matter what their level is in the organization, that doesn't have to do a mix. The ratios might be different. If you're what Rose was, a corporate VP running a division, probably the ratio of leadership activities to management was different from a frontline manager. But I also think it makes people think like the management, the enabling the work, just that day-to-day stuff is not where it's at. Don't let that suck up your time, so to speak. But anyway, I have a very specific point of view on this, and I'm just curious what your reaction is to that. Obviously, feel free to disagree, but I'm curious.
I agree with you. It's a blend of both. They're not mutually exclusive. It also depends on what team you're. I mean, again, depends on the nature of the team. I'm also not tone deaf to what's going on. We got 5 generations in the workforce. So if I've got someone fresh out of BC and they're 23 years old and 24 and they're still trying to figure out kind of the right, I mean, it's going to be a very different level of conversation than it is with someone who's been around for 18, 19 years. The nuance of it's different, right? It's
Totally.
For sure.
So I think you need to be kind of aware in terms, and different people have different people also have different emotional needs, right? I mean, some are extroverted, some are introverted. How we show up, how we communicate, how we like to communicate. To your point earlier, both of you, some folks, again, they want to text. They want, everything has to be. So when you have a conversation, I'll give you an example. The other day I was somewhere and the manager said, "Hey, Rose, I need to give you some feedback." And the look on that person's face was like they just got run over by a greyhound.
Totally. The F word. I call that word the other F word.
Right.
I will tell you, and in addition to that, even that, Slack is big right now. Everybody use their Slack channel. My daughter got a message in Slack. It was just like from the SVP, "Hey, I want to chat with you real quick." And same thing, the look of terror, the look of fear on her face of like, oh my God. Because they talk and it's not like they don't know each other. They talk all the time. That type and that style, right or wrong, creates that type of response. Sorry, keep going with your story, Devin.
No, so I mean, it's the same thing. So I get part of that is like a lot of the work around culture and climate that, I attempt to do with people. So let's rebuild. Rebuild what good work looks like. Let's not be hopeful happenstance about it. So we can't run the same offense that we ran before when we were in the office. Again, there's some good, there's some bad. What is that? And so it's not my culture, it's our culture. So in terms of how I see the world, culture, like, culture and climate and organizations, for the most part, it's a shared values. Again, assuming that values matter in the organization, we live them and breathe them and talk about them, but it's also shared. It's mostly about norms. Like, for example, is it okay to push back? Can I be contrarian? Is that all right? Is there psychological safety? What does that look like? Is it okay to be late? And so I just did a session today when we literally rebuilt the whole culture from the ground up. What are the things we want more of, less of, start doing, stop doing? What makes sense? For example, this client today said, no Friday meetings. Can we all agree that if we take Fridays and have no meetings, that'd be a good thing? Everyone can get a lot of work done and no meetings. But that means you still have to find a workaround. Can we get some ownership of that? Of course, everyone's like, yes. And now they have some equity in the system. You know what I mean? Because now they
Yeah.
put their fingerprints on
Yeah,
it.
that's right. Make them part of the process and then they can support it later.
What it sounds like in a session like that, what you're doing is saying, sure, let's put our vision for what we want, but now how do we actually operationalize that? What are the actual specific tactical actions we're going to do or not do? And that's the key. That's the way you get from the culture that you have to the culture that you want.
No, you're exactly right. See, what occasionally I'll get people go, well, I don't have any influence, or Intel's so big, or I can't. I'm not asking you to boil the ocean.
Right.
I'm asking you to boil a pot of water within the finance
Yeah.
team, or the engineering team. We got 30 people here. It's our culture. It's different than the sales team. It's culture is like weather patterns. And so once you get people, 'cause I don't think a lot of people realize how much of a imprint they have on the culture, like how you show up, how you communicate, how you engage, how you behave. I think of culture like an ATM machine. You either make deposits or withdrawals. And we clearly articulate what are deposits and what are withdrawals. And we name them, Dana, like this would be a withdrawal.
And it's funny you say that. I often, maybe you've run into this too, when I'm doing management training, a lot of people are like, well, I know a lot of leadership that don't do this stuff. You're helping us understand what it is to set your team up for success. But I can see a lot of people at this organization that don't do this stuff. Like, are they ever going to get this training or whatever? And I make the link that you just said, Devin, which is it's not in our control who's going to get this training and if the people above you or around you are going to embrace these practices. However, you can have a huge impact on your team or your department if you do. So trying to get them to focus on boiling that water because, we can't boil the ocean and we don't have control.
Precisely. Yeah. And I think once people feel, and again, I don't hate to generalize, the lack of control, or I'm a victim, or I don't have any influence around here, or all that. No, you absolutely do. I'm asking you, we're in a safe place. We're closing the door. I got 3.5 hours, me, Rose, and Dana. I'm asking you as a leader. I don't have it all figured out because guess what? I've never worked post-pandemic, Uber inflation, political polarization, all the other stuff. I don't have a great, none of us do.
Right.
What we do, right? So what we do know is the smart people in this room show up every day. So what are we going to build that meets us to help us drive the outcomes we want?
Wow, Dana, that was a super fun part one conversation that we just had with Devin. What were some of your takeaways, your hot takes, sister?
I, first of all, just love his energy and his journey. But I think two things he brought up. I know I bang this drum a lot, but I appreciated how he highlighted that no matter what group he's working with, what organization, what industry, you can talk all you want about the culture you want or the standards that you've set. But if you don't operationalize them, if you don't say, so what does that mean we do today and tomorrow? What does that mean we do in our meetings? What does that mean we do in terms of our one-on-ones with our staff? It won't happen unless you operationalize it like that. And again, you lead saying, we know we need to be intentional about culture and we know we want to define it and have a vision for it. And then you manage by actually doing it day to day and identifying like what those actions will be. And I just loved that. And then the other thing he mentions, it was kind of almost an aside, but I really appreciate it, is he didn't use these words, but he brought up situational leadership, which simply means that you manage and lead individuals differently depending on their expertise and experience in the job or in the organization. And that could not be more true. You want to be you and consistent no matter who you're interacting with. But yeah, someone who's brand new to a job or brand new to the workplace is going to be managed differently than someone who's been in that role and at that organization for years. And so I appreciated him calling out that nuance.
Those are great. I have a ton, so I'm going to try and hit them really quickly. When he started, he talked about the learnings that he had early on in his roles at places like Michelin Tire and Enterprise. And, so many people think when they get out of school, they don't get their dream job. And instead of taking advantage of the opportunities to learn in the role they have, they're always hoping they get the next gig that is the dream job. And I remember my cousin running into a situation where his first gig out of school was like managing some of the retail sellers at Dillard's. And he's, I went and got this amazing degree. And I'm like, hold on, like what you have is like a little diamond in the rough. Take advantage of that opportunity to learn to lead.
One thing about that too is he said this thing that I think it's so important. He said, I learned a lot about what I didn't want to do.
Bingo.
And that's so key. And that's what I think your 20s and into your 30s is really about.
That's right.
And it also reminded me, I thought I was going to be a high school English teacher.
Look at you. You're a podcaster.
Yeah. She's a podcaster. And so I did an internship teaching high school English after I graduated, and I knew the teachers. It was at my old high school. And so I just remember really having all this angst about, did I want to go into teaching and education, or did I want to see what the business world was like? And my advisor, again, who I knew, it was a teacher that had been there when I was a student, he was just like, Dana, you are overthinking this. If you're curious about the business world, go check it out. You're probably going to have 5 or different careers, by the way. It was so freeing.
So the other thing, I love that story, by the way. He had a quote, I performed better when I felt, and when the culture and the vibe was right, like I was performing at a peak. And I think there's so much to be taken out of that just single statement, where it led to a follow-on comment where he said it starts with the numbers and ends with the people. And this was so similar to something that Joyce said, right? Joyce was like, as a CEO, if the only thing I'm worried about is the stock price, that's the wrong place.
Yeah, you don't want to think too much about the numbers.
Right. Yeah, you can't ignore the numbers, obviously. But both of them, whether it be, his role as chief inspiration officer or her as CEO, highlighted the criticality of the people. And if we go back to the genesis of the pod, that's it, is to just remind people that the job is truly, how do you create the best environment and culture to allow everybody to bring their best selves to work and thrive, and then allow that to then drive the results and the numbers. So that was that one. And then he had a really great comment about real relationships, and they're both based on trust, and there was practical and emotional trust. And I thought that was just a great framing. And then finally, I was fascinated by his numbers, the numbers that he shared around church attendance down 40, I think he said 45%, family dinners down, away camps down, volunteering down, and a point that gathering and community is lost and it's degrading connections. And it has workplace impact, which I think is a great lead in to the next episode, where we talk about how those attributes and environmental situations are impacting the future of the workplace. So with that, we'd like to thank you for joining us for episode part 1 of Devin. And then we look forward to having you in part 2. Dana, anything you want to say before we wrap?
Yeah, thank you for listening. And you can always reach out to us if you want us to discuss something via my website, bosssolutions.co. And we have a YouTube channel and LinkedIn you can check out too.
Thank you, and we'll see you in the next episode.